Like we get so obsessed with the dashboards that are just puking data at us. That's the part where I'm saying focus on things that don't change. Like the business outcomes, those are not going to change nearly as much and as quickly as the digital dashboards puking the data at you that are coming by, like the numbers are changing by the second.
Welcome to Content Kingdom. This is your backstage pass to the people, tools, and the trends shaping the future of content marketing.
All of us have access to so much media data and channel data. And I think the trap there is that stuff changes all the time. And we kind of focus on that instead of the business results and the business outcomes.
Yeah.
Because we don't control that as much and we don't have access to the information as quickly. And sometimes not at all having access to the information. So you kind of focus on what you have, which is the stuff that's in front of you. And a lot of these dashboards and, we're looking at click-through rates or engagement rates or, how many people shared it and liked it and clicked it and all that kind of stuff. And what that's really just showing you is the activity. It doesn't show you the business outcomes. And I think that's really the big unlock is to stop thinking about the data puking out at you from your dashboards and from the digital perspective and start thinking more about the business outcomes.
And so, you've created this framework, right, with your 8 fundamentals for effective marketing ROI. Can you walk us through that a little bit? Like, what are these fundamentals, and what are some of the things that people need to? Yeah, let's pick one. Like, what's like the most table stakes one, and what's the one that is like the hardest for people to understand?
So for me, the big aha was really around the strong versus weak force. I think there's a concept. There's that's that line about if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail.
Yeah. And
so a lot of times from a marketing perspective, we think about what we have as a tool as an advertising. When I talk about marketing, and right now I'm kind of interchanging marketing and advertising. They're not the same, but most of the time, in a lot of organizations, the marketing department is really their core responsibility is the promotional P, so advertising.
Yeah.
Not pricing, not product, not place. And so when I'm saying marketing, I'm kind of using the marketing and advertising as the same term, even though they're not right now. Okay. But if you're in the marketing department, which really means you're controlling advertising, and if you think about the way we think about advertising, a lot of times we come up with terms like a demand gen specialist. And so, with the term like that, or we're growth hackers or things like that. And so if you think about what those terms mean and what it implies for the rest of the business, that you just need a budget and you can generate demand. And so if that were true, companies like Zoom, Peloton, there's probably a bunch of other COVID brands out there that would never have a problem. If you look at their share price and their revenue, like that would never be an issue. Every company would be going up and towards the right with revenue. And so that's the idea of if you go into advertising with a philosophy of advertising is a strong force in that it can force people, it can force demand, it can force people to buy now. And if you talk about it and measure it in that way, like ROI as an example, ROI is a pretty bad measurement if you're thinking about what advertising actually does. Because what you're saying is advertising is the major factor that delivers a return. It doesn't account for things like product and price and place or competition and any other of the 35 different factors like weather or seasonality, anything like that go into that. So advertising really is a weak force. It's not a strong force. And so if you think about it from a perspective of the weak force approach to in terms of a realistic approach to what advertising can do, it really changes a lot of the fundamental thinking around how we make the promise and set expectations of what advertising can deliver.
Well, that's interesting because, what the picture that I came up with in my mind when you said that, and it really snapped together when you mentioned like all the pandemic brands like Peloton and so forth is, it's almost like advertising is like sticking a net in the water, right? And if there's fish out there, the net's going to catch some, right? But if there's no fish in the water and you're just dragging the net through empty water, it doesn't matter what you do, right? And so I think the point that you just made is that, Peloton exploded because everybody was at home. Home gyms exploded, right? Zoom exploded because we were all at home and we needed new things. We had new problems to solve. And so there was just a lot of fish in that water. And so they were the ones with their net outs and they caught a bunch, right? And they were there. So if you're saying, if you are just a demand gen person who's an intelligent specialist who's been hired by a company, you've got a budget and you're ready to just get to work, you can throw your net in the water, but there might not be any fish there, right? And if you don't have the fish, you're not doing squat with your demand gen budget, right? So I think it's like just language in that sense. And so if it's not the strong force, then demand gen might not be the right term for what we do. Okay. Right. And because it implies that we generate demand. Whereas, as we just talked about with COVID or tariffs and, like there's economic recessions, there's economic factors and situational, like snow season, like you sell less ski equipment in the summer than you do in the winter. There's just some realities that way that you can't force demand. Even though you want people to buy now, doesn't mean that you can get people to buy now. Right. So what's a strong force then? So this is the weak force, right? This is where everybody starts and it's the wrong place to start. So
but
show me the strength.
But gravity is also a weak force and it's important. So it's not to say that it's not important.
Yeah, sure. Right? It's important. Yes.
It's just not the strong lever that we would like it that we believe it is a lot of times. So the strong forces would be things like the economy is a huge, it's a really strong force. Seasonality is a really strong force. Weather can be a really strong force, depending on which industry you're in. Industry trends, like right now, AI is everything. And so there's a natural wave that you just need to, like you said, put your net in the water. And a lot of those people that are in that business are going to capture something, get some fish, because there's just this huge swell of demand or interest in the category. So there's a lot of things that affect the category, that like physical availability, the whether or not the product is available on the shelf is a strong force. Like if it's not there, you physically can't buy it. So that's a very strong force. And so just some realities that way in terms of like setting expectations.
Okay. All right. So so we've got to have availability. We've got to have the trends right. We've got to make sure that we're capitalizing on kind of like the major economic drivers and what the customer segment needs. And those are like the strong forces. So now connect me to content there. How do you, once you know what your strong forces are, what do you do with content?
I mean, content, like the way I think about content, way back when I was in media sales. And so what I noticed about media sales is when I'd have a new client or a conversation, new business development opportunity, over time, I kept a lot of journals and notes about client meetings. And I started looking at there was patterns. I started getting a lot of the same kinds of questions. And so you can think about it like FAQs. And so for me, content is a utility. It's a conversation starter. There's phrasing I've used in the past called the social object. There's two people on either side of the conversation, and the content is a social object that connects the two of them. It's something that allows you to facilitate a conversation. So, and it's a way also that you can use it to position yourself and your brand and your company or your product and your service so that you're providing value to people because you're anticipating the needs that they have. And it allows you to create a conversation with somebody. It opens a door for more conversations. And for me, conversations from a business development perspective are the beginning of a sales cycle. And so the more content that you're producing that's helpful and useful and relevant to the audience, and entertaining and all that kind of stuff, depending on the format, the better.
So, can you give me an example of a time when you felt like you got the strong forces right? Maybe it's for one of your customers at, or maybe it's the Calgary Marketing Association or another experience you had, but you got your strong forces, you understood them, and then you produced a piece of content and it did what you wanted.
Yeah. I mean, like going back to when I was in the sales role that I was talking about before, what I did there was I built an inbound funnel before I knew it was a thing. So it was right about the time of was it the content line, that guy who sold pools or something like that? And I don't know, he was
a content line, but
yeah. There was a guy, anyway, he had this terminal. I always forget the name of his company. Anyway, it's essentially like I started producing blogs that were answering these questions and put a thoughtful approach into answering them. And so what happened was, and I wrote a case study about this, about myself. I had 1 year with no content production and 100% cold calls. And the next year where I did 0 cold calls and 100% content production. And at the end of the year, I tracked my new business development revenue. In both years, I had almost the exact same new business development, but how I got the business was totally different. And so it's not something that you publish the article and then all of a sudden you have like all of this business coming in. It's that over time, as people find it and they enter the sales cycle, they start reaching out to contact you instead of me, in that case, cold calling them all the time. So it changed a lot of the approach. And because I was thoughtful around how I was trying to answer the questions to help solve these problems that people were having, it really led to some better conversations, quicker sales cycles, bigger deals, and ultimately better relationships, because I wasn't the guy trying to force them to buy. I was a guy that was trying to help them solve their problem. And so it was an interesting experiment that I had done with myself. And I think that is something that I've done continuously throughout my career, is just trying to replicate that idea over time in whichever company and industry that I was in.
Got it. So, the idea of not having to chase the customer and being the flame, not the moth, is definitely appealing.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah. So walk me through that particular example a little bit more. So I imagine year one was the chase everybody cold call year. And what's really great about that, having been that guy doing that years ago myself, is that you feel like you're doing something every day, right? You feel like you're working hard, you're earning the business,
Totally.
And you do the math, and there's the old sales edge, right? Like in the old days when people answered their phones, 100 phone calls produces 3 appointments, 3 appointments gets me, this, and that turns into 1 sale. And so like every time I make 100 phone calls, I do the thing, right? Now you cut bait from that, right? You stop making the calls and you start producing content. What was like the first 90 days of that like? Because I imagine that sales for a little while dropped off before they picked back up. What was that like, and where did you need to have grit and determination in that place? Yeah,
it's nerve-wracking for sure. And I had communicated my plan with my manager at the time. And so I told her the reason why I was doing this and the rationale for it. So having some buy-in and some support from my manager was really good, a start. It was also specific to new business. So I already had existing customers and existing clients, and I had some existing revenue. So it wasn't that I was without revenue. It was just the new business side of things.
Yeah.
So in terms of the time commitment, instead of the time smiling and dialing, I ended up just doing the time that I would have done that in writing and thinking. And so the time really was about the same amount of time, but just more focused and more thoughtful around that. But definitely it was nerve-wracking because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was on commission. So I was like, it was on me.
Yeah.
Like, so I was going to get in heck probably if it didn't work out from the business side of things. But for me personally, I was also on commission. So I'm like, this.
Did you just say you were going to get in heck? You are totally a Canadian. That's so funny. Anyway. All right. So where was the point where you had the first glimmer of hope? We're going to fast forward to the present day in a minute, but I want to stay in memory lane here for a sec. Tell me, where was the moment where you're like, hey, it's working. Like, this plan is working. When did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, in the report, it's been a while since I've reread it, but I just started realizing I was getting better conversations with people. Like, first of all, people would reach out to me, which had never happened really before.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of an early indicator. And then I noticed the process around the deals was simpler because I had earned some trust from people already.
Yeah.
And so they were looking for the people who reach out to me, I mean, not everybody's looking for this, but the people who reach out to me were looking for someone to help to guide them on through their media buying journey. And so that was helpful for me because it was less about this sort of contentious, I'm going to hold my card super close and you're going to hold your card super close. And we're not really going to share a lot of information, but we're just trying to fill each other out. It skipped over that part really and went right into I read this thing that you wrote. I'm really interested in this. I've been wondering about this for a long time. Can we talk about that? And I'm thinking about a media buy and I just don't know where to start. And so it was those kinds of conversations that skipped over a lot of the hung up phone calls or I don't have any time to talk to you. And it just went right into, let's talk.
Got it. Yeah. And so the trust is there, the quality is there, the collaboration is there. And now it's just a matter of, and they're self-selecting, right? All right.
And so the volume went down. Like my pipeline looked awful because I had this giant pipeline at the beginning when I was reporting to my boss. Mm-hmm. And so it looked like there's lots of activity because my first position or second position was really full on the pipeline. And then it went down to a handful of deals in the first and second position, but those ones closed at a higher rate.
Yeah. Yeah. Quality, not quantity at that point then.
Yeah. There's a line. I remember one of the guys that I was when I first started, he's like, here's what you do. When you go into these business development meetings, when you're at lunch, grab a bunch of cards out of that fishbowl for the free lunches or whatever restaurant you're at. And then you just tell the boss, those are the deals that you got that you're working on right now. So it was funny because I'm like, I never had to do that because it was the things that were in the pipeline were real and they were there's fewer of them, but they're higher quality.
Yeah. Yes, I have definitely been on the guilty end or the receiving end of a salesperson reporting the fishbowl to me. So that's funny. All right, let's fast forward then. So back from the past to the future in our DeLorean here. What does that look like today? So what is the equivalent of what you did then look like now? Because we're in a different world now than we were back in that day. And so how do you stand up from the crowd? How do you produce content that's going to get you the same trust and the inbound the way that you did it back in the day?
Ultimately it's the same thing. It just the channels change. And so the format of the content changes probably more than anything. I don't do a lot of TikTok videos or anything like that, but a vertical clip of this interview is super practical, right? Like a 9:16 clip. What we 20 years ago would never have been able to do is a vertical clip of this interview because we would never have been able to create the clip or the video recording to start with.
Yeah.
And then there was no platform to put the clip if you had it. So I think the big change really is the basic unit of content went from letters and words to video MP4s and clips now. And so I think if you're thinking about building out content, the way I'm thinking about it now is from a video first perspective, because then from there, you can rip the transcript, you can create clips, you can create images, you can do all kinds of, you can adjust it, modify it, throw it into AI, produce 18 versions of whatever it is that you're trying to do. And there's lots of stuff you can do with video now because it's as a basic unit of content, it is so much more pliable and malleable to the formats of the media channels that exist.
And so I agree with that. And I think that that makes sense. I mean, free plug for Riverside, the group that I use to record this podcast. The second we press stop here, I will have magic clips with 7 of our best moments, all available to me in vertical clip, and then also in the traditional broadcast clip as well. It'll all be there. The challenge that I have though is, yes, I've got all those. I can slam them onto LinkedIn and other places, but I've still got to get through everybody else doing that. And the other thing that I worry about is in the age of AI, how much more advantage do I get by maybe taking the transcript and putting the transcript up on, let's say, my website where an AI tool might be able to find it, as opposed to the video itself. So how do you answer those questions for your clients when they're thinking about all these different things and trying to come up with a unified framework for how they're going to use their content to their best advantage?
Yeah, I think some of it starts with going back to like, what are the problems that you're trying to solve? Or more so, what are the problems that your customers have that they're trying to solve? And then thinking about it that way. There's a lot of like, I mean, you could have, I'm sure you probably even had a whole conversation about SEO and GEO and AIO and all the IOs out there, all the O's. It's a tricky one. Like, it's changing all the time. The rules of the game are constantly changing. And so one of the things that I try and focus on with clients in the Marketing Association and even with our podcast in general is, what are the things that don't change that you can focus on, that if you're making an investment and putting $1 into this activity versus this activity, where is the dollar going to have the most value over time? And so things like, should I put my transcript here? Should I put it there? Like, if it doesn't cost you anything or very little, yes, do it.
Sure.
I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that anybody really does, because the algorithm, like, it's a bit of a black box on the back end of all of these tools and like the way that Google indexes things. And so it's challenging. Yes, try and figure it out. But I would say like the content itself needs to matter, because you can make shit content and nobody's going to pay any attention to it, no matter if you did all the right technical stuff to begin with. So to me, it's kind of the focus on the needs first and figure out that what you're doing is the quality and the effectiveness is first, rather than the efficiency part leading with that.
Sorry, Mark. I lost my train of thought because you won't say hell, but you will say shit. So walk me through. I got it. No, I'm kidding. I
was going to drop an F-bomb when I said heck, and then it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be swearing on this podcast, but then that one just slipped out.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. Well, it's okay. It's all right with our podcast. So, all right. No, but getting back to your point, like, go back to the strong forces, right? There's a problem in the marketplace. We're here to solve it. And if there's a strong force out there, tap your content into the strong force so that your net is in the water where the fish are, right? And it doesn't, you're saying like, because you said focus on the things that don't change. That doesn't change, right? That's going to be the same regardless of getting cute with trying to do optimization for AI or anything else with all the different acronyms. Stay focused on that. That's not changing. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that accurate?
No, I think you can get really obsessed with like the technology and become so the first question you asked, like, how do we measure and track and talk about ROI? Like, we get so obsessed with the dashboards that are just puking data at us. And so we can make all kinds of changes based on our content approach and the media plans and all that kind of stuff, because of an engagement rate that comes back, let's say. But the engagement rate isn't the thing. The sale, the business objective, like maybe it's profit, maybe it's the customer acquisition, maybe it's the market share, maybe those are the things that the CFO is going to care about. And if we start changing stuff every time that we get a good or a bad engagement rate, we should really think about like is there any correlation between engagement rate and business outcomes to begin with?
Yeah.
And most of the time the answer is no.
Yeah.
So that's the part where I'm saying focus on things that don't change. Like the business outcomes, those are not going to change nearly as much and as quickly as the digital dashboards puking the data at you that are coming by, like the numbers are changing by the second.
Yeah. So, all right. So let me challenge you on one thought about this though. And that is that I think a lot of marketers will build like a top of the funnel conversion model, right? And they'll try to model like, hey, if I get this many visitors and then I get this many engagements on the form, after that I get through the abandonments, I get to this, and they move down that form. And it's kind of like the old days of like when you were talking about making the cold calls, right? So many calls, to so many meetings, to so many sales. People have this idea, I do too, of like having this demand model that goes from A to Z. But what you're saying is what I'm hearing you say is throw the demand model out, because who cares if you're getting a bunch of mid-level steps in there? The only step that matters is the end. So whatever gets you to the best end step, you might get lousy engagement all the way through, but if 100% of them convert and it produces better financial results, that's better than having this like nicely organized top of the funnel metrics that has a low conversion rate at the bottom. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that what you're saying?
Not totally putting words in my mouth, and I agree with you on a lot of the points you just said. So, but I would rephrase some of the things there. So as an example, the funnel is a terrible model. Like there's that line that all models are wrong and some are useful. So the funnel is a model and it's wrong. It was an interpretation that was adopted by the sales and advertising industry, but built originally by a sales guy to talk about how sales training should work for his sales training. Elmo St. Elias Lewis in 1898.
Mouthful. Okay. Yeah.
So in 1898, this guy invented it. The AIDA funnel. Well, it got like the model itself, and then it got appended. The funnel got appended in like 1920s or something like that, and then it got adopted by marketers. But it was for about 30 years. It was just a sales model, and so it got adopted by advertising folks and marketers. But it doesn't actually describe how buyers buy. If you show that model to anybody who's not in advertising and marketing, they would have no clue what you're talking about. And most of the people would say, "Buy? That's not how I buy."
Yeah.
And so we construct this model around how we think people buy, but it's not actually how people buy. And so then again, it's the hammer and nail kind of thing. And this is where I think that the model does us a disservice. It's like an invisible hand that guides how we think about how advertising works, but it's not actually how advertising works. And so it leads you down a whole bunch of, it's helpful because it's a common language. Like we can all talk about tofu and bofu, but then you get in front of the CFO and they're like, okay, I'm not going to say heck. What the fuck is tofu?
Yeah. All right. There we go, Mark. Nice.
So that's the part where you're like, okay, well, if this is not helpful from a business perspective, then what's like, and we have the same problem that Wanamaker had 125 years ago, which is half my advertising wasted. I just don't know which half. Despite having the best, most sophisticated tools ever known to humanity and with all these digital platforms, then what are we like? Maybe it's us. Maybe it's the tools we're using and the models we're using that's not being as helpful and productive as they could be. So as an alternative, there's a ton of really good models that are evidence-based, that are built in research, that are based off of credible sources and laws of growth. Ehrenberg Bass is a big publisher of a lot of these things, but there's a whole bunch of other sources out there. There's an example of a different kind of funnel called the cash flow funnel that I think is super useful and much more productive for most marketers to use and to frame language around. It's still familiar because it looks like a funnel, but it talks about cash flow, which is a very financial term. And it's more oriented toward business folks. They would get cash flow. And it structures the conversation of marketing departments around this cash flow funnel. And it's literally a funnel on its side, but time is along the bottom axis. And then you've got in-market, out-of-market buyers. So the idea with the cash flow funnel is you can have a conversation about what are we doing to attract and capture as much in-market demand as possible. that just exists within the category. And then how are we building the future demand for customers who are not in market today, but will be tomorrow? And so then you can have a different conversation rather than talking about tofu, mofu, bofu. You can have a conversation about cash flow today versus cash flow to more future cash flow. And then there's some realities around that I think is fundamental to how we talk about and describe what advertising is and how it works. And so the simple shift in model is super helpful.
That's really interesting. Is this a model available? Like, is it something we could put in the show notes or? Okay.
Yeah. So it's the B2B Institute is the first organization that I'd seen that built this model, but it's also baked into it as a 595 rule from John Dawes at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. Okay. The 595 rule basically says in any given market, it's a rule of thumb, it's not a law, but it varies from category to category. But it basically says in most markets, on average, you're going to have about 5% of the customers who are in market today and 95 who are not. And so you need to calibrate that to your own business because in some cases, and it also might be seasonal, like Black Friday as an example, the higher percentage of people than 5 are probably buying in your category. Right. Or at COVID times, like there's a lot of people buying Peloton. So, there's a reality of the market dynamics that this model accounts for. And so, both those sources are, you can easily put those in the show notes.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so when you come in at Quadical as a fractional CMO, do you have a go-to model that you like to deploy? And is it universal enough that you can apply it to a lot of different businesses, or does it vary by industry and size or other variables?
No, it's the same model. And so it's not ADA, not the awareness, interest, desire, action funnel model. And it takes a bit of time to work through that. But the model that I prefer to use, it's a combination of the cash flow funnel model that we just talked about, and then mental and physical availability for the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. That's a really good one as well. For simplicity, the cash flow funnel is really easy to wrap your head around. So it's just easy to start there.
So when you come in as a fractional CMO, do you get tissue rejection when you deploy these new ideas, or do people adopt them easily? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I love that phrase. I have to remember that because I think I talk about it a lot, like it's like a virus and an antibody response from the organization.
Yeah,
it's definitely a thing, and it's something I've done research on with the Marketing Association too, to understand how many people believe in some of these models. Mm-hmm. And so the reason I call them invisible hands is because people believe in them, and they don't really always understand what the source was, what the original context was from which it came. And so there is a bit of tissue rejection, but it's a little bit more, I guess the way I've approached it is we're trying to get to a result, which is a business outcome. We're not trying to, and if everyone agrees to that, then it's an easier process to go, okay, well, let's talk about this process that we have. With most of the time, it's the funnel because that's the most dominant model. How's that working for you? It's kind of like a Dr. Phil line. And for the most part, and then people will say things like, well, I don't really get it. I don't understand it. And it doesn't seem to correlate with my business outcomes. And then so we start talking about, okay, well, why? Well, what is that? And then if there's been agencies that they worked with in the past, or any other marketers, a lot of times you'll have like, well, I've got this special sauce kind of approach from a lot of other organizations. And it's my way of doing the funnel, like ClickFunnels or, demand. You get people that phrase things differently, but it's always built around the funnel. And so when you root it in like a physician talking about the reason I got I'm really interested in this evidence-based marketing approach is because before I started media sales, I was a pharma sales guy. And so at that time, I was talking to doctors, like specialists and GPs and all kinds of people in between, who would always talk about them practicing evidence-based medicine, which just meant that if I take the approach of do no harm and do the things that are proven more often than not to work in this kind of patient, then that's a good approach. And we'll continuously learn and improve because science is self-correcting. And so I took that approach into marketing with the idea, if you follow the evidence and you just look at the existing models that are out there, like ADA, and you start looking at which ones have evidence, there's a whole bunch of them that you'll find that don't actually have any evidence. And so then you just start leaning into, well, if that doesn't have any evidence and it's not working to deliver a business outcome, then why are we using it? Is there something better?
That is fascinating. I had no idea that the model was rooted in 1898 technology, and that is definitely not appropriate for the current day. So that's fascinating. You know, I've got a bunch of different thoughts on this, but I like where you're going with this, because if you can do evidence-based marketing, it really gets to the idea that I've always said, which is I try to encourage marketers to fail, because it's just part of the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis that whatever you're doing is going to be successful. And then you try it. And if you get the evidence, and that's the big step, right? Get the evidence to prove that it's successful or not. But I think where I've gone wrong, and what you've corrected for me, is, to me, I would have used something from the demand gen model of looking at some of my tofu, mofu, bofu metrics and said, your thing has been correct because it has moved things successfully into the model, when really I have had a blind spot where I've not then said, well, did that turn into any actual cash? Because if it didn't turn into cash, then you just made the model look good. You didn't actually produce any cash.
Yeah.
You know, so
it's a tricky one too with that, because then I think one of the dangers is going too far into the specific tactics. And I know you were talking about content at the beginning, but it's tricky. There's a tendency, because we have these digital tools, that we want to prove the value of the channel I'm running, right? And because there's a budget conversation that happens every year, and you're defending and justifying your existence and all that kind of stuff. And so rather than looking at the marketing department as a whole, maybe that's a CMO role, but as an individual, I go, and I was this guy for a while. I'm like, look at the ROAS I'm getting on this ad, right? And why would you ever stop giving me money? Because I can make it rain out here, right? Only later to find out that it maybe wasn't incremental and we would have got the sales anyway. But it doesn't. That's almost beside the point, because I was just trying to prove my existence at the time. Yeah. And so because you have the ability to go down to like a specific link click, you have this idea of that, well, this is the ROI that I'm getting, or the ROAS I'm getting off of this particular piece of content. But the harder part and the more important part is, what is marketing in total doing? And so because the attribution you're putting on that individual piece of content or the individual ad is almost never 100% exclusive to that specific element. And so like when you start adding up, well, the ROAS you got from that, the sales we got from that, and the sales we got from that, and the sales we got from that, it probably almost always is going to be more than what's in the bank. Because all these channels are trying to claim attribution and show their own existence is worth it too, right?
Yeah, that is fascinating. Yeah, I think that Mark, as we wrap up here, because I realize we're running out of time, I really feel like you've kind of hit the nail on the head for me in terms of a blind spot that I feel like I've had, and it reminds me of an analogy on the sales side that I had. I had this client once, and I'll never forget this. It was about a decade ago. They had some new, very smart guy come in from business school. He'd done this detailed analysis. He was like some kind of family member of the owners. And he said, you know what I've noticed? I noticed that our most successful salespeople average 1 quote per day. And so my policy I'm going to institute is I want all salespeople to produce 1 quote a day. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to check in with every salesperson. Did you produce a quote today? Well, what this guy didn't study was Goodhart's law, which says the minute you make an input, the subject of a measurement, and hold people accountable to it, it ceases to have the value you intended, right? So what started happening in this guy's case was, everybody sent out a quote a day.
He got exactly what he was looking for.
Yeah, he got what he was looking for. But the thing is, I watched one guy call up his uncle and be like, hey, uncle, what's your email? And the guy's like, here it is. And he goes, great, I'm going to send you a quote for some for some rocker switches that we're selling here because I got to get a quote out today. You're the only guy I can think of that I need to quote. So, that has absolutely no business or bearing on the effect that we're looking for. I never thought of applying that on marketing to the top of the funnel, which is, if you focus too heavily on these input-based metrics of the engagement model, they cease to matter because all you're doing is getting good-looking metrics without getting the result that you're looking for. And I think that's been quite the insight for me. Mark, I think the last topic that I want to ask, so it's sort of a French goodbye, is, as we think about AI as it plays a role in this, AI as it relates specifically to engagement models, evaluation, and helping you automate different processes up in marketing. How do you get your arms around this so that you really stay focused on what are the correct outcomes and not maybe necessarily the engagement model? What's been your exploration of AI as you cross into this zone?
Yeah, that's a whole. It's a great question, and we could probably talk about this forever. But
we might have another podcast. Might have you back for an episode. Yeah,
I would say the one thing. So I've been building agents. I've been building agents for clients. I've been building agents for myself. I've been building agents for the Marketing Association, and trying to do it on different platforms as well. So Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT. Like AI, what it comes down to. So I have this our series of articles I'm writing for work right now, and the concept of the T-shaped marketer or the T-shaped employee, where you've got a horizontal bar, a narrow but shallow depth of knowledge across the top, and then a vertical depth in one particular area. So let's say content production, or content marketing. So content marketing might be a vertical depth, and then say business acumen and emotional EQ and things like that across the top bar. My thought around that is just as a framework is that I think with AI now it's a pie where you've got the vertical depth in your specialty and still the horizontal bar, but there's another vertical, which is AI, and that can augment any individual in a lot of ways. But more and more, I think there's an interesting element with the horizontal bar where you can embed AI in the horizontal bar and put the business acumen, the thinking, like what does a good decision look like? What are the mental models we should be using? Embed that in the horizontal bar so that you can onboard people really quickly and use their expertise to help guide the decision-making throughout the organization. So it's a complicated area. There's a whole bunch of stuff around decision science and things like that I think is really interesting with AI. I think you can produce a lot of content and a lot of helpful content, but you're going to get the mean or the mode, like the average. And so as long as you're okay with the average, and for the most part, AI is pretty intelligent. Like they score the highest ever on the Claude was Opus 4.7, just got really the highest score ever on the GDP Vals test, which is an equivalency test to measure how well it does against knowledge workers. And so against 44 different industry knowledge workers, it's about as good as somebody with 14 years experience. And it produces something in seconds instead of it being like what would normally take someone 7 hours. So it's good, but you're going to get the average. And it doesn't have the same kind of like connectivity between the synthesis of ideas. And so you have to kind of tell it what to do and direct it what to do. I know it's a long-winded question. I don't know if it really answered what you were looking for, but.
Well, I think I had a chance to take a look at some of the stuff that you produced and post on LinkedIn where you talked about like the idea of a T versus a pie. And the ideas there. And so it tracks for me. And I think probably a great place to say, this is a deep topic and would love to hear more about it. But if someone wants to learn more about it now, Mark, where do they go to get your latest thoughts and ideas and start to get more information about what you're thinking about?
Yeah, thanks. I think the LinkedIn is a really good source. If what I post there is most frequent. If you have access to work, there's a whole bunch of articles I've written on work, which I'm really proud of. A lot of the stuff I've put up there.
And then,
then the podcast,
WARC, right? WARC.
Correct. Yeah.
Work. Yeah. So is it pronounced work or wark? So
I always say work. I think.
All right.
Is that what I said?
Yeah, I don't know.
No,
I don't know how
sure.
to pronounce work. So
what the heck?
What the heck? All right. So on work.
Yes. And then the podcast would be another good one. So the Sleeping Barber podcast. There's my colleague and I, or my buddy V, he and I just started this year talking about, we have this one format called the Sharp Cut, which is us trying to synthesize a lot of these ideas and put it into a show that we just have a point of view and a distinctive position on particular topics, like incentives. We did a 3-part series on incentives, and the invisible hand thing is a new one that we just published as well. So we're trying to dig into these things to try and understand for ourselves better and wrap our mouths around the words that need to come out when we like how we think about particular topics and controversial subjects.
Yeah, love that. Well, and if anybody is interested in engaging you as a CMO from Quadical, where do they go to learn more, to work with you to engage?
Yeah, Marc at Quadical, MARC at quadical.com is my email. And then you can also just find me on LinkedIn too. That's probably the 2 simplest ways.
All right, Marc, thank you so much for being a guest on Content Kingdom. This has been a fascinating episode. I would love to have you back to talk more about AI. And I think that, so stay tuned for an invite coming to you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on, David. This has been a lot of fun.